Hi, my name is Alex, and this is lesson 26. For number one, or for the first part, we need to just evaluate the expressions. So, if you're not familiar with square roots or radicals, um, what they are is basically the inverse of squares. So, if you have something like x squared is 45, and you want to solve for x, you take the square root or the radical of it, and basically, for number one, 45 isn't a perfect square, meaning that there are no two whole numbers that multiply easily to make 45. So what we have to do is take out any numbers that we can. So to do that, you can make like this tree with the factors. So 9 times 5 is 45. And we're looking for pairs of numbers to take out. So if we split up the 9 even more, 3 times 3 is 9. We have a pair of 3 that we could take out. So we could put a 3 on the outside, and on the inside is going to be a 5 because we can't take this one out. So our answer is going to be 3 times the square root of 5. Okay. For number 2, we have the square root of 64. And 64 is just going to be one of those numbers that are easy. Um, let's see. 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, and 64, and so on. These are all going to be relatively easier when you're familiar with square roots. So 8 times 8 is 64. So the answer is 8. But even if you didn't recognize 64 as being a perfect square root, we could just break this down so that it's 2 times 32. And it doesn't matter which factors you choose because eventually, if you do it right, you'll get the right answer. So if we want to break it down to the prime numbers or until we find um, our pairs, we have two twos right here, and 16 is also 4 times 4. So there's a pair right there. So if we take this out, it'll be 4 times 2, which is also 8. Okay. This next part, we're taking a step further. Um, we're just going to have to solve the equation, so we have like a couple more steps. For number one, we want to isolate this x on one side, or this x squared on one side. So to do that, we could divide both sides by 4 in order to get rid of this 4. So x squared is going to equal 10. And to undo this square, we could take the square root of both sides so that it becomes x equals the square root of 10. But when we're taking the square root, there's this thing that we have to put in front of it, and it's plus or minus. This is just a notation. This basically just means x equals negative rad 10, or it equals positive rad 10. Okay, and the reason for this is because when you're taking the square of something, you could put in a negative number. Like if you put in -1, this equals 1, because -1 times itself is still going to be +1. If you put in a positive, it's going to be the same thing. So you have to account for this negative or the positive. So that's why we put this thing called the plus or minus sign. Okay. For number 2, do the same thing. Isolate both sides by adding 20. So it becomes x squared equals 24. And if you take the square root, it becomes x equals plus or minus square root of 24. And 24 is not an easy number, but we could take out a number from there. So 24 is also 6 times 4. 6 is 3 times 2. 4 is 2 times 2. So if we look, we have a pair of 2. And we're left with 3 times 2, or 6. So it becomes plus or minus 2 times the radical of 6. Okay. For this next section, it's the same thing. So for number 1, to get the x squared by itself on one side, we could divide both sides by 33. So x squared equals 9. And take the square root of both sides, so it becomes plus or minus square root of 9, or also x equals plus or minus 3, our answer. Number 2, we need to get the x squared by itself from both sides, on one side, so we could add 32 to both sides, so it becomes 2x squared equals 32. Then divide both sides by 2 to get the x squared on its own, so this becomes x squared equals 16. If you take the square root of both sides, 4 times 4 is 16, so it's a nice easy number, so that becomes plus or minus 4. Okay. Number 3, same thing. To get this w squared on its own, subtract 13 from both sides becomes negative 2. Divide both sides by 2, so it becomes w squared equals negative 1. This is going to be w equals plus or minus square root of negative 1, but this is no solution. And we write no solution because if you think about it, right, we're squaring something. It's impossible for this to become negative. Okay, so if you put in a negative, it comes out positive. If we put in a positive, it comes out positive. So there's no way for it to be negative. Therefore, it's no solution. Number 9, move the 13 to the other side. So it becomes negative 25. Divide both sides by 36. But if you notice, 25 divided by 36 is not going to be a nice number. So we could just leave it in fractions. Okay. So do that. And take the square root of both sides, then it becomes plus or minus square root of 25 over 36. So this could also be 5. Oops. So when you're doing fractions, you could just treat it like it's a number, so it becomes x equals plus or minus 5 over 6. It's just the square root of 25 over square root of 36. Move the x6 over to the other side, so it becomes 7. Square root both sides, so it becomes plus or minus square root of 7 for our answer.